Welcome along to another Savvy Marketing Show. I'm very pleased to have a special guest with me today. Adrian Savage is a real email guru. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Andrew, thank you.
It's very good to have you along here. Our paths haven't really crossed in the various groups that we're both a member of. I think we've kind of chatted a bit back and forward, but we've never actually spoken in person. So please tell me a bit more about yourself, first of all.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short because I can go on forever. When everything started, I was probably born a geek, but I realised I was a geek when I was 8 years old when my dad brought home one of the original Apple II computers to do his work. So that was my introduction to technology. So one of the first ever Apple fanboys. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I'll go and whiz through everything between there and when I really got into marketing. Just had a long, boring career in IT, telecoms, that kind of thing. And then it was probably about 8 years ago I discovered Infusionsoft and started learning how to really take marketing and combine it with my IT geekery skills. Got into Infusionsoft that way, learned all about marketing automation, and started working with people strategically as well as tactically. And then probably about 5 years ago, I had my first client who just couldn't get their emails delivered. And as it turns out, then that was when I first learned that particularly Microsoft, bless them, decide that they're just going to throw people's emails away without even putting them into the spam folder. And I learned that the hard way, and I actually lost a client because they said, well, we're not going to use this platform if we can't get the emails to Microsoft. And back then I had no solution. So I started doing lots of research, developed some software to solve specific email deliverability problems for a very small portion of people. The good news is most people don't need that software. But along the way there, I learned a huge amount about what matters when you want to get your emails delivered, how to get them into the inbox, how to avoid the spam folder. I've been very lucky to work with some other really good names in the industry who also specialize in email deliverability, and there's people out there that have forgotten more than I'll ever learn. So I'm very lucky that I can then pull on their expertise when needed as well. And just more recently, I've kind of specialized down from just doing general marketing and marketing automation to focusing a lot more on the deliverability side of things, because there are very few deliverability experts and consultants out there, and most of the conversations that I have with people, they don't actually realize some of the what are actually simple things that you need to know to get your emails through. So I've really spent a lot of time understanding what works, what doesn't work. Because I run my own software, I think when I last looked, there's about 600 million emails that have gone through my email software in the last 4 or 5 years. So I've got lots of stats and lots of data that I can draw on there to see what happens as well. Worked out that there were some reporting tools that weren't actually good enough in different platforms like Infusionsoft and ActiveCampaign. So I started creating my own reporting tools as well. So using all that, I've been able to take a lot of data and make it easier for people to start measuring the important things they need to know to get the emails out. Like I said, could go on forever, but that's kind of a
No, that's really good. And some of the stuff that you're talking about there, the easy things you can do to help your deliverability. We'll come on to that in just a second. And also a little treat for the end then, because if you're a geek of like Apple II computers or whatever, I've got a little treat for you. I'll save that to the end though. My main reason for getting in touch with you, because of late there's been some real problems in getting emails through, especially to the likes of Yahoo, etc. Can you explain in terms that we can all hopefully understand what's been going on?
Okay, so I will try and just very simply describe how an email will get from a marketing platform through to the end user, and then try and kind of relate that back to what happened at Yahoo and a few other things that happened at roughly the same time. Are there any specific platforms that people watching this are more likely to be using than others that I should reference, or is it just make it more generic?
If we keep it fairly generic for just now, because we'll have some Infusionsoft, there'll be some ActiveCampaign and MailChimp. a constant contact in there.
Okay, perfect. Because the good news is they all work in similar ways. And, you know, the good news for the people that are scared by technology, I won't go through the diagram that's behind me on my whiteboard, because that shows you at very detailed, geeky level exactly how everything bolts together. But what I will try and do is describe that.
I'll just say, if you do want to have a good explanation of that, there's a video of your own that we can watch, and we'll include a link for that later on. Yeah,
I can share the link with that for sure. But in a nutshell, the way that it works is that it's not that different from if you're sending an email yourself, whether you're using Gmail or Outlook.com or an email from your phone. The principle is always the same thing, in that when you're sending an email from you to someone else, it's got to go from your email server to their email server. Nice and easy. And there's a very simple protocol that's been defined for, dozens and dozens of years now on the internet that explains how one mail server talks to another mail server. And the idea being, effectively, let's say that I'm sending an email to you, Andrew, then I will go on to, let's say I'm using my phone, and I will write a little email saying, "Hi, Andrew," and I'll hit the send button. When it hits the send button, the first thing my phone does is it sends the message to my email server. And then what happens when it lands on my email server is it's then going to look up and say, right, what's Andrew's email address? What is the correct server that I should send this email to? And there's something called the domain name service that tells you where it goes. And once I've looked up, once my email server has looked up the address of your email server, it will open a conversation with it. It's like knocking on the door saying, "Hello, I want to talk to you." And sometimes at that point, then your email server might say, "Well, hang on, I don't think this is a very friendly email server that's talking to me. I don't even want to talk to you." So sometimes, even before the message gets sent, you can be cut off. That's something that I'll come back to. But let's assume for a minute that your email server has identified my email server as a friendly server, and it's saying that I'm happy to receive the message. Then my server will say, "Hello, I've got an email message for Andrew. Here it is. Will you accept it, please?" And then your email server will say, "Yes, I've accepted this." And then the connection gets closed. And then after that, as far as I'm concerned, that message has been delivered. Now, the thing is, it may not still get to you, because what happens then is your mail server is going to decide what to do with that message. And it's going to look at lots of things about that message. It's going to look, like I already said, it will look at the address of the server that sent it. And if that's a bad server, it might say either, "I'm not even going to accept the message," or "This is really bad. I think it's spam. I'm going to put it into the spam folder."
What would determine a bad server, or is that something you're going to come back to as well?
I can cover that now. The main thing is if it's a server that is known for sending large volumes of unwanted mails.
Okay.
That's probably the biggest marker of a bad server, because there's lots of different organizations around the internet now that collect data on who is sending bad email. And it always pretty much comes down to, well, what address of the server was it that sent this email? Because
every server's got a unique identifier, yeah? Yeah,
absolutely. It's got a name and a number, and they will look at both sometimes. And what it will do is, if a lot of bad email has come from one place, then that information gets collected by these different blacklist providers and so on, and you can actually look up whether or not a particular mail server has been blacklisted. And in some cases, probably in many cases, the servers that get blacklisted are ones that have been compromised by spammers. So, we know about viruses and Trojan horses and things like that. It's actually quite simple sometimes to get control of another mail server and use that to send spam out. So that's one of the ways that spammers get around the fact that people don't want to hear their messages, because they will just take someone else's computer over and send all their rubbish out that way. So that's one way that a mail server can get onto a blacklist.
And that's why it's really important to keep your virus software up to date as well.
Absolutely, totally, because it turns out that actually, in this day and age, because every computer we own is connected to the internet, then any server can get compromised, because even if there's no mail server software on a computer, the laptop that I'm talking to you from now, it would be possible if my laptop wasn't protected, that someone could actually take control of it, put software on it, and it would start sending mails out from, it would be from another name, but it would still have the address of my computer on it. So very important that people do that. But assuming that your mail server has decided that my mail server was okay, then it'll say, right, let's look up this Adrian Savage person. Has he got a personally bad reputation for sending spam? So on the one hand, we're saying, is the computer sending spam? But then the next thing is the person themselves sending spam?
Okay.
And in those cases, then if I did have a reputation for sending lots of spam, again, your email server might decide that it's going to put a big question mark over my email. And rather than put it into your inbox, it will put it into the spam folder. And it can also look at the content. So if the word Viagra is in the email, then the chances are then that's someone sending some kind of dodgy Viagra spam or something like that. And although this is less prevalent than it used to be, the content and the wording in those emails does still make a difference. So if there's lots of free and business opportunities, and there's a whole list you can Google for spam words and things like that, and they'll give you a whole list of words to avoid. And a quick aside there, I would say don't take those lists too seriously because there's lots of words in there. And as long as the email you're sending isn't too over-promotional, you're unlikely to trigger the spam filters these days. They have got very good at working out what's legitimate and what isn't. But the content matters, the sender matters, the server that it came from matters. But assuming all of that is okay, then the mail will ultimately arrive in your inbox, and it's the mail server at your end that decides where it goes. There's a few other complications beyond that, particularly if you use Gmail or G Suite, which is Google's paid-for mail service, because this is probably going back 4 or 5 years now, I've lost count, but you'll probably remember the big hullabaloo when they created the promotions tab inside Gmail.
Oh, yes.
The primary inbox, the promotions tab, a social media tab, updates, and suddenly overnight 80% of the email was being diverted from the primary inbox by Google to one of these other tabs that you had to click on. So suddenly all of these marketing messages suddenly ended up in the promotions tab. So again, the email might get to the inbox, but depending on how promotional it is, then it might end up in the promotions tab. And there's been a lot of fuss because a lot of marketing email often does end up in promotions. But in fairness, if it's a promotion, that's where it's going to end up. And although we've done a lot of work identifying what can get emails into the promotions tab versus the inbox, you can't always rely on it. If you send an email personally from your own phone, just with a "Dear Andrew, best wishes Adrian," that doesn't look like a promotion. Anything more than that in marketing terms, it might. We can't always be sure, but all of those things come into account. But to summarize it, it comes from my server to your server. Your server tells my server it's accepted it. My server thinks it's been delivered. And deliverability technically is only that little bit there.
Right, yeah.
After that then, is the difference between deliverability and inbox placement is, did that message actually make it into your primary inbox, or did it go to promotions, did it go into spam, or in some cases, and Microsoft is really good at this, is did it get just silently dropped so you didn't even know it had been received?
Really?
Yeah. And that was the challenge that I first faced 5 years ago, where because of the reputation of the server sending the emails, Microsoft were literally doing that. They were just throwing stuff in the bit bucket, and no one even knew it had gone to spam. Didn't get that far.
Yeah. Now, there's been a big hullabaloo recently, especially with people trying to get mail through to Yahoo. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's been a couple of different issues here. Just as a little aside as well, Microsoft, who aren't connected to Yahoo in any way, they actually made the situation worse as well. So just to put things into perspective, then on average, and I'm talking mainly about marketing emails here, and if we exclude corporate users from this as well. So if we took the usual kind of personal or small business background, then around 60% of all email boxes now are on either Gmail or G Suite. So that's a massive amount of the email world that is controlled by Google. So once again, with web search, they got the stranglehold. Now they're doing it with email as well. So it means that it always pays us to be very clear on what Google are doing and what rules they're setting, because if you don't follow that, 60% of your emails might end up in promotions or spam straight away.
Okay.
However, that doesn't really affect what's happening with Yahoo recently. Microsoft, and that is things like hotmail.com, outlook.com, Office 365 is their paid for service. That probably accounts for maybe 15 to 20% of the email world as well. So that's a big chunk. And then in third place behind those two are a company called Verizon that we've not necessarily heard of much in the UK, because they're a big comms provider in the US, but they own the brands of Yahoo and AOL. So Verizon are the third biggest email handler in the world, and they've probably got between 10 and 15% of the email volume that goes around as well. So they are big enough to be reckoned with. And all of these different providers, the big thing they do is they use something called machine learning. And what machine learning does is it's always trying to stay one step ahead of the spammers. It's trying to understand, using a much more complicated version of the rules that I just explained, it's trying to work out what different data points should it analyze to decide whether or not each individual message is spam or a promotion or legitimate.
And they do this because they're wanting their customers to stay with them, obviously, aren't they? So they're wanting to be providing what they think is the best service for them, yeah?
And it goes one step further than that as a little aside, because if you imagine that Gmail, Hotmail, and Yahoo's Mail, they're all free. No one pays anything for them. So that's all of those services, they're funded by advertising. So what that means is, supposing I use Gmail and I open a message in my Gmail window, I will be shown an advert at the same time. And Google, bless them, want to make as much money as they can from advertising. Mm-hmm. So what they're going to do is they are going to bias their software so that the messages that go into the inbox are the ones that are most likely to be read, so that they can see as many emails opened as possible on their platform so they can make more money. Because we all know that people occasionally click on adverts. No matter how much you hate them, sometimes you're going to click on an advert. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that Google are not really trying to protect you from spam to help you. They're doing it to make more money. And bearing that in mind, you've got to make sure that if you want your message to be read by your audience, then make it as compelling as possible and as certain as possible they're going to open that message. One of the things I'll come back to later is why it is so important to focus on engagement and people opening your emails. But going back to Yahoo for now, what they did a few weeks ago now, probably about 3 or 4 weeks because it's kind of moved on a little, but they made a big change to their machine learning setup. And suddenly, overnight, it became much, much, much harder to get Yahoo to accept emails. And what we saw suddenly was, in the past, Yahoo would accept an email and then they would do whatever with it, as I explained. But also what an email server can do is they can say, I don't want you to send me this message right now, come back later. And that's called deferring. And what Yahoo started to do, and it looks like it was mainly from mail servers that had a poorer reputation, they said, we're not ready for this email yet, come back later. And what we found is that those deferrals kept happening over and over and over again. So there was a big backlog of emails to Yahoo that started building up across, and it didn't matter whether it was Infusionsoft, MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, you name it. Every single provider suddenly saw this at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then to make matters worse, at the same time as this, Microsoft either changed their setup or they had a problem. But what that meant was that Microsoft suddenly started sending out error messages to the mail servers sending their stuff, saying, we have no resources available, come back later. So suddenly we reached this point where maybe 25% of the world's email volume was suddenly backing up on Infusionsoft, on ActiveCampaign, on MailChimp. And I'm glad I don't work in the operational side of any of those businesses, because
it's a perfect storm, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit like, imagine working for a mobile operator on New Year's Eve. You have to make sure that your mobile network can cater for all those millions of Happy New Year text messages that suddenly come in, and the chances are that the network will jam up and they don't all get through. And this is effectively, we had a New Year's Eve type of event hit these mail operators that have probably never had anything like it before. And they suddenly had to deal with the fact that they had this massive backlog of emails. I think at one point I heard a rumor that Infusionsoft alone had a backlog of 5 million emails.
Oh, my Lord.
And I'm guessing here, but let's say that they had designed their system to cope with maybe a 1 million maximum backlog. So suddenly when you get a backlog of 5 times what you can cope with, all bets are off. You just don't know what's going to happen. And different mail providers dealt with this differently. Some of them had better infrastructure than others, so they were less affected. Some weren't as much, but it hit everybody. What I know is that in many cases they had to change their policy, because going back to the protocol that mail servers use to talk to each other, the unwritten rule in that protocol is if the other server is too busy, then you back off for a bit and you try later. And maybe you'll wait half an hour, then you wait an hour, then you wait 2 hours, then you wait 4 hours, and it just keeps going up like that. And in the end, it'll probably get through. And then maybe after 24 hours, it gives up completely. When you've got 5 million emails waiting around, you can't do that anymore. So my understanding is they had to make decisions to stop retrying sending the mails through. If they failed on the first or maybe the second or maybe the third attempt, that was it. They gave up much quicker. So what we suddenly saw was that lots and lots of emails to Yahoo were suddenly bouncing rather than being accepted for delivery. So when I did further investigation, I found that, very interestingly, the open rates weren't changing that much. So I started doing a bit of digging around. And again, different email platforms work differently, but in most cases, then whether it's Infusionsoft, ActiveCampaign, MailChimp, it doesn't matter. They will discriminate against your emails based on how well your audience opened your emails and how frequently you mail them. So let's say that you've got someone who you haven't emailed for 6 months and before that they didn't open anything from you. The chances are that that particular email will come from a different email server than if you're mailing someone who opened something from you yesterday. And what we realized was that it was the people who hadn't engaged and hadn't been sent much email and hadn't opened much were the ones that Yahoo was bouncing and deferring these messages.
Okay, so let's just get that straight then. So somebody like, say, Infusionsoft, they'll have pools, if you like, of servers that they send mail from, and the reputations for each of these servers can vary from excellent to, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the emails which have been proven in the past to get good engagement, etc., they'll get sent from the excellent servers, and the emails to people who haven't been engaging will be sent from the servers lower down the scale. So even if you're sending out one email broadcast with, say, 10,000 emails on it, each of those 10,000 emails is not necessarily going to come from the same server. It's going to be spread between the three, yeah?
That's exactly it. And different email providers do this in different ways, but the principle is normally the same. Sometimes they might treat one sender the same for everything. Other times they'll split it the way we've just described. But what I noticed, certainly I did the most research into Infusionsoft at this time, was that the number of people opening messages sent to Yahoo didn't change that much. The percentage changed because obviously fewer were getting through. But for the Yahoo destinations where people were reading them in the past, they continued to get those messages. It was only the ones where people either hadn't been sent things for a long time or they already hadn't been opened things when they were starting to bounce and get deferred and things like that. So we don't know this for certain, but it does look very, the evidence suggests very strongly that Yahoo suddenly took a much greater dislike to receiving emails that people weren't opening. And they told the world they didn't like this by saying, we're too busy to talk to you, come back later. But obviously, because of the amount of volume that they receive, that had a bigger impact than if it was just some little internet provider in Iceland or something like that.
So this really kind of goes to show that there's a lot more information, a lot more data now being held about on the likes of ActiveCampaign and Infusionsoft about the emails that they're sending and the engagement that they're getting, but also from the email service providers themselves who are receiving the emails. How well received, how well engaged are these emails getting? What kind of engagement are they getting? So you really have to try to marry up the two of these, don't you?
Exactly. And it is a very fine line to tread, because obviously, as a business owner who wants to get his message out there, I want as many people as possible to have the chance of reading my emails. But if I'm sending messages out there where there's no chance of them ever being read or very little chance, then I'm probably wasting my time, and the Gmails and Microsofts and Yahoos of this world are telling me fairly clearly now, don't bother sending those emails. It's very, supposing you've got a list with 20,000 names on it, it's very, very difficult, and it can be almost heart-wrenching sometimes to make the decision that, well, actually, this proportion, it might be a quarter or a third of my database, haven't engaged with me. I've got to stop sending to them. And a lot of people don't like making that decision, because I guess it's a mental thing. You think, well, they'll still want something one day.
Yeah, so and this is all kind of coming down to making sure you're cleansing your list quite regularly, yeah?
Yes. So now's probably a good time just to very quickly mention the acronym that I've come up with. You can see it on the board behind me is the word RACE. So the R stands for reputation, so we already talked about that. And the reputation of the server and yourself is very, very important. You've got to do everything you can to keep that very, very clean. The A stands for authentication. I won't talk about that in much detail now. But there's something called DKIM or DKIM, which stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail. And it's a way of digitally signing your emails to say that you really sent them. If you can
do a geek alert there, by the way.
Absolutely, totally. But every single email marketing platform supports this now. So if you haven't sent it up, if you're sending good emails out, use DKIM. It's beyond the scope of this call to explain how that works, but and there are experts that can set this up. So if it looks a bit daunting, don't try this at home, folks, unless you know what you're doing. But authentication is really, really important as a way of boosting your chances of getting the email through. The C stands for content, and I already talked about that as well. Make sure the content of your emails is very clear, and it's the right content for the right people. Because the E stands for engagement, and as we've already said, only send your emails to people that engage with you. Because if you're sending emails out and people aren't opening them, Google really started doing this. I think probably the first Infusionsoft conference I went to 7 years ago, they were talking about this even then, is that Google are crowdsourcing reputation data just by looking at what their users are doing. So let's say that I've got 10,000 people on my database, and I send out one broadcast to these 10,000 people. If only 500 people open those emails, there's 9,500 people that have ignored me, then Google is taking that as a clear signal that I'm sending rubbish out. So next time I send an email, Google are more likely to stick me in promotions or, heaven forbid, the spam folder. If at the same time I'd only sent out 1,000 emails to the people that had engaged and interacted with me most recently, I'd probably still get 500 open them, but Google then think, he's sending out some content that people really want to see, because more than half of our audience are opening that email. And the actual number opening them is very similar, but the percentage is completely different. And I've often joked with people that I can double their open rate overnight, and I will. I'll go in and I'll pull out half of the email from their database, which is why, just as another little aside, you should never compare your open rate with someone else's, because it's totally dependent on the engagement of that list that you've got. And I know there are some internet marketers in the UK that I won't name and shame. They talk about how they've got a mailing list of 100,000 people, and they make a big thing about, I'll do a promotion for you, and my list of 100,000 will see it. What they don't tell you is their open rate is about 2 or 3%, because nobody wants to hear from them. And I know that they would get much better results if they really culled that down to a hardcore group of maybe 5 or 10,000 of the people that really care, because that's how you improve your reputation, and hence you improve your open rate as well, because it becomes a virtuous circle. That's the best way to describe it. If you're sending a small number of emails to a highly engaged portion of your audience, then Google will see that you're one of the good guys, and Microsoft, Yahoo do the same, and they will be more likely to put future things you send into the main inbox as well, in which case, that way you should actually get even more people opening it, because in the past some of it might have gone to promotions or spam, but the better the open rate you can get, the more chance you've got of everything going into the inbox. So as a starting point, you'll see a better percentage open rate straight away, but then you should see it start to rise, because you're being rewarded for looking after your list. So absolutely, list hygiene and removing unengaged contacts is really important. And then also cleansing, like you said as well, which is there's something called list scrubbing, where you can go through and comparing the email addresses with known spam trap addresses and things like that. That's also another way of keeping your reputation clean. But there's a lot that you can do with your email list just to make sure that it is as clean as possible, and that you are minimizing the amount of emails that you send to people that don't open your stuff.
And with systems getting more sophisticated these days, when I say that, it's ActiveCampaign, Infusionsoft, etc., and they allow you to segment your audience even more, that will allow you to send even more kind of hyper-focused emails. If you think only 30% of my list will actually be interested, and these are the people who are tagged in a certain way, it's a win-win for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah. And now even MailChimp, bless them, they've finally caught up and they've started doing this properly. So, in the past, I often had to wean people off MailChimp and move them to something like ActiveCampaign so they could be cleverer with what they do. But now MailChimp have caught up. They're now giving better segmentation, and that's exactly it. The example that I usually give is if you're a pet shop owner. Some people will love dogs, some people will love cats, some people love both, but in most cases, a dog owner won't want to receive emails about cats. So why would you send a cat email to a dog owner? And I think if you bear that in mind, whatever your audience is, there's almost always a way that you can have a similar example in your own business and just only send the right things to the right people who really want to hear from you.
And setting up that kind of thing can be as simple as if somebody clicks on the link in your dog email, then just tag them as interested in dogs.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. Some people choose to ask them with surveys, but you don't even need to do that. It's like you say, just because these systems can track what links get clicked in emails, what gets opened, what doesn't, you can infer a lot about people just by their behavior. And that is really important, particularly now that it's becoming harder to get the emails into the inbox, because we need to learn as much as we can about our audience so we can send the right things to the right people.
Okay, let's take a look at completely new contacts. Okay, so say I've got a landing page with a great offer on it. Give me your name and your email address, and I'll send you this free white paper, the usual kind of thing. How can I ensure that the email that I send out to them with the download link, etc., is actually going to land in their inbox?
So this is one of the toughest things that you face now, because as you say, this is probably someone who hasn't heard from you before. Therefore, they're filling out a form, and it goes into Infusionsoft, ActiveCampaign, MailChimp, it doesn't matter, and they're going to send out an email. And as far as the email platform is concerned, this is an unengaged contact. So it might not even go from the best IP address at that point. It might not go from the best email server because it's an unknown quantity. So that means there is a slightly higher than average chance that Google or Microsoft or Yahoo is going to put that into the junk folder, the spam folder, or the promotions tab. And this is quite a change to established practice, because particularly if people had landing pages in the past, they might have had some kind of offer on the thank you page, or an upsell, or a tripwire, or all these different things. But being able to sell something on the thank you page is less important now if they're never going to receive your emails. So there's quite a major shift now that on the thank you page, when so let's say someone fills out the form saying, I'd like to download your free video, and they fill the form, name, email address, they click the submit button, and then the thank you page needs to be very different to how it used to be. And what it should say now is, thanks for filling the form in, Andrew. If you want to be absolutely sure that my email gets to you, then make sure you whitelist me. And whitelisting is the practice of telling your own email provider that you want to receive email from someone. And the challenge that we face is that process is different for Gmail, for Microsoft, for Yahoo, for iCloud. There's a lot of them out there.
But there's a handy tool, isn't there?
There is indeed. There's a very good tool that, again, one I mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of people that I have learned more about this from. There's a guy called Chris Lang who has created his own email whitelisting instructions that you can actually personalize and install on your own thank you pages. And the web address to find this is really easy. It's just whitelist.guru. It's one of those rare .guru domains that has come out there. But if you just go into your web browser and type whitelist.guru and then scroll down the page, there's 3 boxes you can fill in with your name, your email address, and your brand name. And there's a little red button, and put those details in, and it will create your own personalized whitelisting instructions that if you put those onto your thank you page, people can follow those instructions, and that will mean that they are more likely to whitelist you and your email goes into their inbox rather than the spam folder. And again, it's careful how you word it, because you're giving people a lot of work to do there, particularly if it's something like Gmail. Google now have become so much more likely to put things into spam that he's suggesting you tell your audience to set up a filter in Gmail to automatically route your mail to the inbox and say, never mark this as spam, which is great. But we know that pragmatically lots of people won't do this. So it is important to make those instructions as simple as possible. But you do need to make it very clear that almost if you don't follow these instructions, there's the risk you won't get my emails.
So you want to make your offer or content, whatever, so valuable that it's pushing people. Yeah, I definitely want to receive this and go through those instructions.
So in a way, Google are doing us a favor because it forces us to raise the bar on the quality of what we send out, because you can't just send some tired old newsletter anymore. You've got to send some really good content that people really want to see. And then as long as it is that important, then they will go and find it. They will look in their spam folder. They will whitelist you. But it is very important to do that without a doubt. Another little aside there as well is, when I've done research into this, I've found that the majority of emails that are unengaged inside an email platform, so just to be clear here, these are the emails that aren't opening emails that you're sending, then I would probably say that 3/4 of the unengaged emails will have never opened anything.
Okay.
So this makes it interesting, because effectively what we're saying is that, supposing I'll go to your website and fill out your landing page. If I open your first email, the chances are I will keep opening them. If I don't open your first email, the chances are I will never open anything. But most people continue to send emails to those people that never open for weeks, months, or even years. So one of the things that I'm suggesting now, and I'm still testing this, but I think the principle is very sound, is that if a new contact in your database hasn't opened anything in the first 7 days, the chances are they're not going to. So if that's the case, why would you keep sending to them?
Yeah.
So it becomes very important to look at the engagement, not just of your overall audience, but look specifically at the behavior of your new people, because there might even be spam bots and nasty people out there just doing it anyway, just to put junk in your list. There's lots of reasons to keep things as clean as possible.
And if you're using systems like Infusionsoft, OnReport, ActiveCampaign, etc., it's easy enough to set up a campaign that if they haven't opened it, then
absolutely
it's up to bin them, basically. Yeah.
Some of the platforms aren't as good as this as they should be. So as I mentioned at the start, I've written a few different bits of software that if your marketing platform isn't quite good enough, then my Lab Central software, which is for this, it's totally free. It can help you understand what's being opened and what isn't being opened, because there's one very important metric that people don't really take into account, because you probably know this as much as I do. Most people are obsessed about their open rate. Agreed?
Oh, yes.
The open rate doesn't really matter that much, because there's too many other things that are important. But the one thing that I tend to focus on is a different metric, and I don't know of any email platform that measures this yet, which is why one of the reasons that I made Lab Central free to do this. Let's supposing you've got 10,000 people in your audience. How many of those have opened at least one of your emails in the last 30 days or the last 60 days? Because that's what really matters. We don't care. Some people might send out an email every single day, and the law of averages says that no one is going to open every single email that you send. So what we need to understand here is what percentage of your audience will open something in the last 30 days or the last 90 days, last 6 months, last year. And what you'll find is that number, unsurprisingly, goes down. So a year ago, maybe 60% of your audience had opened something in the last year, but it might only be 35% in the last 30 days. And that gives us a good indication as to how much of our list we should be cleaning off, because we don't want to be sending emails to people that haven't opened anything for more than 3 months or something like that. So being able to look at that kind of statistic makes a big difference, because you can make more informed decisions about your marketing. If all you've got is you're seeing a 10% open rate, that doesn't mean anything necessarily, particularly, as I said, if it's 10% of an engaged list, that's really bad. If it's 10% of an unengaged list, that's actually quite good. So knowing how many people have opened something gives you a good idea into how much care you need to give in keeping your list up to date and cleaning it and keeping the hygiene good.
And is this the kind of thing that your tool can help with?
Yeah, absolutely. They're evolving all the time. So the main thing they're focusing on at the moment is this engagement over time. But I'm adding some extra tools in there as time goes on, because as we've learned the hard way in the last few weeks, you might find that your emails are going through to Gmail fine, but it might be that Microsoft or Yahoo have suddenly cut you off. And if you're looking at your open rate as a trend inside something like MailChimp or Infusionsoft, you don't know which domains have suddenly gone off you. So I'm trying to find a way of reporting at that level as well, so that people can start to see where, if anywhere, they're having problems. Because sometimes it can happen overnight. Is one particular sender like ActiveCampaign or Ontraport or MailChimp or whoever, all they need to do is have one failure of their spam defense, and some spammer gets onto the system and sends a load of rubbish out, and suddenly their servers will be blacklisted temporarily. And it's always good to know that, because you don't, even though, I would never recommend people switch mail providers, because more often than not, you'll find that you have a massive dip in open rates when you switch from one platform to another, because Google in particular will think that someone else is spoofing your email, or that you're trying to beat the system by using two platforms or something like that.
Explain just briefly there what spoofing is.
Okay, so spoofing is just someone else sending an email on your behalf.
Or pretending to be you.
Yeah, it can be that, or in some cases, it's also a practice that spammers use, is that spammers will send the same content from lots of different places. Yeah. And that's called snowshoe spam, because you know how a snowshoe spreads your weight out across the snow? Snowshoe spam is trying to stay under the radar by using lots of different servers. And if you're sending your content from more than one place, that initially looks like snowshoe spam until Google and Microsoft catch up and realize that actually you have switched providers and it's okay. But when you're doing that, there's always a dip. And in fairness, I know someone in the email team at most of these big platform providers, and they all work really hard to get the emails out. And every single platform has got someone complaining about deliverability, whether it's Infusionsoft or ActiveCampaign or Ontraport or MailChimp. And switching, more often than not, you're going to be out of the frying pan into the fire. It's much better to stay put and focus on getting your reputation up in one place rather than switching about. Because we all know the grass is greener on the other side, right? It's just when we actually go over and have a look, and it isn't necessarily.
Yeah. And I heard recently that email service providers, Gmail, etc., they're actually, correct me if I'm wrong here, but they're actually placing a lot more emphasis as well on looking at where links within emails are heading and taking that as an indication of spam. So if a spammer switches from one provider to another, they're still going to get caught out, because ultimately they're sending to the same destination. Is that true?
It's kind of true. It's an interesting one, because if you use an email marketing platform, then you'll notice that they do the link tracking, and the only way they can do that is they have to rewrite your links to go through their servers. So if I send an email out with a link to my website on it from Infusionsoft, the link in my email will actually be going through an Infusionsoft server that then redirects the user to my server. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that Gmail, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, they cannot follow those links, because if they did that, then the marketing platform would think that someone had clicked on it. So what that means is that if you're sending mail via a marketing platform such as Infusionsoft or MailChimp or whatever, then the only link that the mail provider will see is that platform. They won't know where the ultimate destination is. But if, putting that to one side, if it's a normal email that you're sending just from your phone or from your email client or whatever, then those links will be looked at. And if you're sending someone to a site that is known to be a phishing site or a spam site or something like that, then that will absolutely cause you a problem, and your emails might end up in the spam because of that. So email, if you're sending via an email platform, it's less of an issue, but that's a good example why you should never use bit.ly links in an email as an example.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Because bit.ly, so if you don't know what bit.ly is, it's a link shortening service where you put bit.ly/something, and that will redirect. And it works great on social media where people are posting links and they don't want to take up all their Twitter characters and things like that. But if you're using an email marketing platform, don't ever use bit.ly or anything like that, because Google in particular will say, oh, there's a bit.ly link here. I know lots of spammers use bit.ly. This is probably spam as well.
Yeah, I've actually seen, we've seen examples of that. A client of ours used quite a lot of bit.ly links in one of their emails, and looking at the results, you could just see them dropping into the promotions tab or the spam tab.
Absolutely.
In there. Here is a philosophical question for you then, Adrian. people these days, they say email is dead. Nobody uses email anymore. We've got Messenger, we've got WhatsApp, we've got this, that, and the next thing. Is email still as prevalent?
I don't think it's declining as much as people say. Most of the people that say that email is dead are the ones that are selling their messenger bot training programs and their text message marketing training programs and things like that. Maybe I'm being a little bit cynical here. In fairness, you should never, ever put all your eggs in one basket ever. If email is the only way that you've got to reach your audience, then you're probably making a mistake. You should have a plan B and a plan C. But email is still one of the best solutions out there. It's low cost, it's highly effective, and as long as you're qualifying and engaging with your audience correctly and only sending to the people that want to hear from you, then that is great. Now, it might be that, say, younger demographics might prefer Messenger or something like that, so your audience might dictate which channel you use. And one should always have a good mixture of social media, email, Messenger, whatever. But if someone still only uses email, even in this day and age, they are still going to have a very effective marketing campaign. I think there's always going to be a new kid on the block, but Facebook Messenger is constantly evolving. The thing with Facebook Messenger is Facebook still decide what you're going to see and what you don't. I saw they tried it at some point where they put all company messages into a little folder, and then that disappeared again. They obviously decided that didn't work, but they could change at any moment. At least with email, even though we're at the whim of Google and Microsoft and Yahoo now, it's not quite so controlling as, say, the Facebook environment or something like that.
And I suppose email is still a kind of the most universal communications method, because not everyone's on Facebook, not everyone's on...
Exactly. I think the only other real, ubiquitous options are probably text messages, because almost everyone's got a mobile phone. But I tell you what, if you send unwanted messages by text, then you're for it very quickly. And the other one, of course, is good old-fashioned direct mail, because people don't receive stuff in the post anymore. So
that's interesting you're saying that, because I've been, we're doing stuff with direct mail now, just starting up with some clients here, because it is a novelty, isn't it?
Yeah, it works. If we go back 20, 25 years, I lost count of the number of junk mail things that came onto the doormat every day. These days, we might go 2 or 3 days and we don't get anything in the post. So if a bit of mail comes through, much more likely to look at it. So sometimes the old ways are still the best ways. It is just, don't ever just do one thing.
Yeah, now, I don't think you mentioned the website address if people want to get hold of your the tool that you're talking about.
Okay, so we'll probably make sure we publish it somewhere as well. But the website is just Lab Central, so it's labcentral.io. And if people go there, then it's free registration, and you can log in. It will take you through the process of connecting your email platform and downloading data, running reports. At the moment, it supports MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, and Infusionsoft. We are going to add other systems to that as time goes on. So if your favorite platform wasn't mentioned there, then check back in the next few weeks or months, because we are adding extra platforms onto that. Mainly, whoever shouts loudest will get the support.
Excellent. Are there any other kind of quick final tips or hints that you can give us?
I think the main one really is just focus. Be absolutely obsessive about engagement. That is the most important thing. Giving people whitelisting instructions matters massively. If you're doing a lot of online lead capture, tell people how to whitelist you, and go to the whitelist.guru page if you want an easy way of doing that. But other than that, it's just be absolutely obsessive about focusing on your engagement. Stop sending to people that haven't opened anything for months and months. Focus on the people that do, and send the right content to the right people. Use your segmentation. Do that, and there's people out there that will give you lots of other ninja tricks and things like that. You don't need to be clever. Just do one thing and do it really well.
Excellent. Listen, Adrian, it's been brilliant having you on here. I've still got my geek.
I was wondering.
Just in a second, but if anybody wants to get in touch with you directly to ask you about if you can help them with their delivery issues they might be having, how can they do that?
Lots of ways. Email is just adrian@adriansavage.co.uk. Facebook is always a great way. So that's just Adrian Savage on Facebook. I think I've got facebook.com/Adrian Savage, so that's easy to find there. And similarly LinkedIn as well. So I'm on Twitter, but I don't really check that. And I haven't discovered Instagram yet. I'm not down with the kids. Email, Facebook, or LinkedIn. That's the
right. I'm going to try and turn my webcam here. It has a tendency to fall off here, but if you look up there, can you see what is lurking up?
That's not a pet, is it?
It is.
Wow.
Let me move that down a bit. There we go.
Look at that. Yeah.
That's a Commodore PET. That's the 8096 model.
Wow.
That takes me back. And I spent many hours sitting on that,
Imagine.
doing data entry stuff for my dad's civil engineering business.
Wow. No, that's... I think I've won my Geek Award recognising that so quickly. Back in the days, it was Apple IIs and PETs and occasionally IBM PC, but we don't talk about that.
Yeah, and up in the loft, I've got my Commodore VIC-20 and Commodore 64 as well.
You're definitely a Commodore man then.
Yeah, absolutely. Commodore was our thing. Well, at school, it was Commodore PETs all over the place there, so that's what it was. Anyway, we could talk about that all day as well. Maybe we'll do that sometime. Adrian, brilliant having you on the Savvy Marketing Show today. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon, okay?
Great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.